Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and apologies that we're starting just a few minutes late. We're having some technical issues, but very happy to see you all online. My name's Anne Fordham. I'm the Executive Director of the International Drug Policy Consortium, and I'll be moderating this webinar today. This webinar is called the CND68 and Drug Policy Reform, Unpacking the Key Implications. And we're hoping this discussion today will really be an opportunity to take stock at what happened at a very eventful 68th session of the Commission on Narcotic Drugs. It really was a historic session. I think many of us beforehand were, of course, anticipating some different perspectives and positions from the United States in particular under the new administration. And there were rumors that the US would in fact call a vote on all resolutions. And those rumors turned out to be correct. And this was unprecedented to have voting on all of the resolutions that were presented. And, hot on the heels of the session last year, of course, which was the first time in decades where we actually saw voting on substantive resolutions. We also noted that the shift in the US position kind of paved the way for new alliances between different member states and regional groups. And you can definitely see this in the voting results for the resolutions, where the US was really isolated, only being joined sometimes by Argentina in voting against the resolutions, except for on the Colombia resolution, which we will have a discussion about when Ambassador Laura Hill is able to join us. And this was a resolution establishing a independent panel to rethink the international drug control machinery and architecture. So we have a really exciting lineup of speakers for you. Our first speaker today, in fact, is going to be my dear colleague, Gloria. Gloria is our regional director for Asia, and Gloria is going to focus actually on the role of the US at this CND and how this sort of reshaped the global order and the discussions. Gloria, you have the floor.
Thank you, Anne, and good day, everyone. Sorry, can you just bear with me for a minute? I'll try to bring this into a slideshow. And hopefully that's showing okay for you. So as Anne said, I'm going to be focusing on the role of the US at the CND and some of the impacts it had with the other countries and on the issues under discussion at CND. It seems relevant, actually, maybe also to give a bit of context and also to highlight the contrast in the change in the US position by reflecting a bit on how the US was at the CND last year. So last year was also of like notable significance for the CND. One of the major things was that harm reduction, a term that despite being agreed language across UN settings, has never been officially adopted at CND until last year in a resolution that the US had put forward on overdose prevention. And that resolution from the US came about because of it prioritizing our response efforts to reduce and prevent further deaths in the opioid overdose crisis, where we have seen thousands upon thousands of people dying in recent years. And you see the US and a number of other member states, including Colombia, where there was a real effort to coordinate support amongst member states to rally behind, including retaining this term harm reduction in that resolution. And in the end, in a historic moment where CND has not voted on a resolution since the 1980s, Russia called for a vote on that resolution, and which was not successful. And in the end, there were 38 of the 53 members of the commission who voted in favor, and only 2 voted against. That was Russia and China. And so if we then look at the changes that have now we've seen this year at CND, it's also helpful just to give a bit of context. I think within the US, in the US's drug policy. So the US recently released a statement on their drug policy priorities for this year. And you see front and center again is efforts to respond to this crisis of deaths from opioid overdoses, especially from substances containing fentanyl. And in order to, as part of those measures that that the government plans to undertake, they particularly highlighted targeting borders. So looking at border control and targeting drug trafficking organizations, and bringing up the issue with source countries of fentanyl, including through economic measures. And so we've seen this kind of play out in terms of the higher tariffs that have been put forward for China from the US government. In their priority statement, they did also refer to other measures such as prevention and treatment, recovery and overdose prevention and reversal measures. In terms of internationally, we've seen so far in, I guess, kind of the short term in which the Trump administration has come in, very much an America first agenda, which overrides all their existing international commitments and relations. So we see that there's quite a few kind of concepts and terms that the US has taken issue against, particularly on the Sustainable Development Goals, the World Health Organization, amongst other UN agencies, and other language that they don't perceive to align with their American values, namely in relation to gender, for example. And we've seen this happen not just at the CND this year, but also already at another UN forum called the Commission on the Status of Women that was held in New York in March as well. So then if we look at CND in March, these shifts in the US, their political shifts and the policy shifts have had a profound impact. So we saw that there were 6 resolutions that were proposed at CND this year, and in the Committee of the Whole, where those resolutions are kind of discussed, debated, and changes are proposed by member states. The US made many proposals to remove and to change language, namely on those issues that I mentioned in the previous slide. Any references to the World Health Organization, for example, to the Sustainable Development Goals, and to gender-specific approaches. And the whole week was in an incredibly tense diplomatic environment where it started off with, it appeared as if member states weren't sure at first how to respond. But then by the second day, it built, well, I think already by the end of the first day, this already started to turn, where countries started to speak out in opposition to what the US was proposing. And I think one key example to note is the opening statement that the US made on the first day of CND on the Monday, where they singled out Canada, Mexico, and China to blame for the flow of fentanyl coming into the US, leading to the opioid overdose crisis. And I think part of the backdrop that also, sorry, before I move onto the funding issues, also important to note for China, like by the end of that first day after the opening statement, China had already insisted on having a right of reply, and made a statement in response to the US's opening statement, saying that basically the US shouldn't be blaming other member states for the issues that it's facing back home, and that it should be looking at what they are doing in their own within their own borders, looking at treatment, for example, and prevention, education, and doing better on those instead. And then part of the backdrop that's important to note is was the funding freeze and the funding cuts from the US that had a really large impact on many NGOs, as well as UN agencies, and amongst them, particularly the UNODC, the World Health Organization, the UNAIDS, amongst others, were severely impacted. I'm going to go faster now because I only have a few minutes left. So last year was the first time in a long time that we saw a vote on CND resolutions. And this year, this trend continued. So it was basically the US that pushed for all resolutions to come to a vote after most of what they had proposed in terms of changes to the resolutions were opposed by many other member states. And in addition to a vote on resolutions, there was also a vote on a proposal that was made by the US and Argentina to delete a standing CND agenda item that referenced the Sustainable Development Goals for the CND session next year. So here is a graphic where our brilliant colleague Juan has kind of developed to show how the regional blocks voted. So green is voting yes, black is abstain, white is absent from the room, and red is against. And so you see this trend where the US that Anne mentioned is very much in isolation. And on this particular issue, it was the US with Iran and Argentina voting against only. So the US was basically, and you see these are the other voting kind of outcomes for the 5 of the resolutions, where the US was always voting against. In the case of 2 resolutions, they were the only ones voting against the resolution, and in 3 others joined by Argentina. In the resolution on Colombia that Ambassador Laura Gil hopefully will be able to join us and to speak more about, Russia joined US and Argentina to vote against that resolution. But in the end, it was successful. And this was a hugely significant and a progressive proposal from Colombia calling for an independent review of the UN drug control system. And it's really interesting to note here, there are a lot more countries here that abstained from the vote. But it's surprising to note, I think, those who abstained and also those who voted in favor of it as well, that we think is worth noting. So I think one thing we wanted to say in terms of the changing role of other countries is interesting to note that countries such as Russia, Iran, and China are no longer the only leads in opposing progressive proposals. And I think a surprising thing to note here was Korea and Japan, for example, voting in favor of an independent review of the drug control system with the resolution proposed by Colombia, while other traditionally conservative countries such as China, Singapore, and Indonesia abstaining. And lastly, I think what we think is important to look out for going forward is whether countries will continue to take a firm stance in opposing proposals from the US to delete references to things that have been proven important to the international community, such as the WHO Sustainable Development Goals and gender-specific gender diversity priorities. And I think it's really interesting to see if the approach from the US will differ next year. It did seem as if they were unprepared, and the delegation was smaller than before. The ambassador for Vienna had resigned shortly before CND. Perhaps next year will be different, and they will come with a stronger alliance with other countries to support their proposals. It's important also to note that shortly after CND, there was an ECOSOC session where there was a vote for new members of the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, which has 53 member states, and Russia is now replaced by Ukraine. And then Russia and Iran no longer being members of the CND, and therefore no longer able to vote for CND resolutions and other issues that require voting for in at least the short-term future. And I think lastly, just to note, as Anne has already flagged, it would be important to monitor the new alliances that may emerge given the changes with the US, looking at particularly how countries from the global north and south might be working together more to stand against the US on certain issues. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gloria. Thank you for that very insightful overview. And I think it was a great way to start the webinar because, of course, it really was the backdrop to all of the discussions there that happened. And please, just a reminder to colleagues, if you have questions or comments for our panelists, please do drop them into the Q&A box and we'll pick them up. So now we'll go to our second panelist. And I'm very delighted to introduce Her Excellency Laura Hill. Laura is the Ambassador of Colombia to Austria and the ambassador at large to the United Nations for drug policy for Colombia. And I think it's fair to say that her leadership, her courage, and her political strategy and diplomatic skills has really, shaken up the debate on UN drug control in Vienna. And of course, the achievement of this resolution that passed at the last CND, really is an opportunity to address some of the very serious shortcomings that we see in the drug control system and some of the very serious impacts, especially in terms of human rights, health, and development that we are seeing around the world. And of course, Colombia is no exception. So, Ambassador Hill, I hope you are there. I can see your name on the screen. And very delighted to have you with us today. You have the floor.
Sorry, I'm trying to find some place where you can see me, actually. Okay, so thanks, Anne, for inviting me to talk to this group about what we did at the CND last March. And I'd like to begin by saying that whatever we did it together, because without the work of international civil society for so many years, we would not have been able to get either the harm reduction resolution last year or the panel this year. So my first message is a big thanks. And I think one of the lessons learned, I'm gonna, I in these past 2 years, I think I can just draft a few lessons learned. That would be one, that a government never loses if it works constructively with civil society. So the resolution is the result of a coalition we had been working, a very proactive drug diplomacy ever since the government decided to formulate and implement a new drug policy that would change basically the treatment of the growers of coca bushes in Colombia, and start prosecuting the higher echelons of the trafficking chain. So that national drug policy had a chapter in international diplomacy, but it was never very clear how that was to be implemented. And that's where all of you came in, because you helped me when I arrived in Vienna find the path that I had to follow to actually produce change in the global drug regime. I'd like to begin by saying that when I was appointed in Vienna, I was extremely disappointed. I was like, I'm never going to be able to do anything in Vienna. That's a place that's dead. Nothing ever happens in Vienna. I'm sent there just in exile, just so that I won't be able to do anything. And 2 years later, here we are. So, in last year, in order to get the harm reduction resolution, we built a coalition. This coalition was 62 countries, including 63 with Colombia, including the States. But that coalition has pretty much kept in shape. We haven't lost that many members of the coalition. It is true that many countries, last year was a major electoral year all over the world, that many countries shifted to the right. The emphasis changed, but we didn't lose them from the coalition. If that's something that we need to recover. We lost the United States. The coalition pretty much keeps in place. And that's very important to remember when you think about how the voting went. We managed to keep several countries with us. So that coalition drafted statement that calls for a comprehensive review of the international drug regime within the framework of the convention. We got what we could get. What we could get is still an independent review of the global drug regime with a potential for reform, for transformative reform, at a very bad time, but still, it is our job to do something with it. So the resolution had 30 votes in favor, 18 abstentions, 3 votes against. We were negotiating until the very last minute to change votes. China was going to be a vote against. We managed to get China to change to an abstention. I used every resource in the diplomatic toolkit to get this resolution adopted. And I talked, my delegation talked to every single member of the CND with presence with a diplomatic representation in Vienna. So we held 47 bilateral meetings, both at an ambassadorial level and expert level. And this is something that I want to emphasize, because this was not, oh, the momentum came, or the moment arrived for the resolution. It was hard work, and it was real hard work, because we had to sit down with a lot of people who did not want this resolution. And we sat down and dedicated to the small and the large, to the weak and the powerful, to those friendly and those unfriendly, as much time as any other. We gave everyone the possibility to propose, to speak, and we actually did listen. The resolution the resolution we adopted is not the resolution we presented. It differed a lot, and it was our way to engage in dialogue, because I always sustain that Colombia could not change this alone, that Colombia has to build alliances in order to change. And building alliances means also compromising. In any case, we introduced changes, and up until the very last minute, we were trying to give assurances to countries that we saw dubious. We worked a lot on the Arab countries. The Arab countries were about to be all negative votes, and we managed to appease them, to calm them, and to get them to abstentions. So this, I think, was diplomatic work at its finest. The delegation, the Colombian delegation, did extraordinary work. The experts we have worked, put the extra mile in order to get us there. But in the end, this is collective work. It's the work of many countries that are frustrated with what we have now. And it is a work that is based on research and experiences that you provided for us during all this time we have been working together. So the resolution now, we have started the meetings about the cost of the panel and how to set it up. As you know, one of the things our intention was not to completely push UNODC out of the scheme of the panel. Our intention was to have UNODC's presence balanced by other UN agencies, because we sustain that the UN has to leave the silo mentality and work together. And as you know, Gloria was saying, harm reduction had been used pretty much in UN documents all over the place, except for CND, just before 2024. And we wanted to break that. We had to, UNODC is in the driving post right now. So we have to work with UNODC and we have to make it work. The only way to make things work is to engage. So we all need to engage to UNODC to make sure they do not serve one side or the other of this debate on the panel. We have to engage with the chair. The chair is an Indian chair. You saw the chair at the CND. We need to engage with the chair. And we need to focus on what's essential for us. And what's essential for us is the composition of the panel and the process to get there. And in general, I would say the following about, in these dire times we are living, I think all of us need to know what's really essential, what we need to fight for. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because the reasons why Argentina, for example, voted with the US had to do only with the references in many resolutions to Agenda 2030. So what I would say may not be, many of you may not like it, but this is the thing. Many of those references of Agenda 2030 were in PPs, and many were not essential. And I think what we need to decide when we start, when we start thinking about what to do in the future is, or at least the ones I have decided, the things I've decided with my team is, we're gonna go fight for Agenda 2030 right there, what is essential, what is absolutely essential for the resolution. Whenever we can let it go, we will let it go. Not because we don't believe in Agenda 2030, but because we need to be able to be strategic when calling votes. So for us, the challenge right now is where to go from here, because we need to get the panel going, which is my immediate challenge right now. And we need to start thinking about what to do at the next CND. What is going to be the goal for the next CND? Because for the past 2 years, the goals we set with this group, we were able to achieve them. So what you think we should be doing at the next CND? We will keep you informed about the panel. I already had my first meeting. That's something that's my priority right now. The summer I'll be working on this. I'll keep you informed, but I think we have to rejoice in the wins, but let's start thinking about the next one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Are you able to stay with us to the end of the webinar?
I'm able to stay. Yeah, I'm able to stay a little bit longer. Yeah.
Okay, because there's some questions for you, which I don't know whether I should ask you now or if you'll still be with us in 30 minutes or so.
I'll be here for 30 minutes.
Okay, great. All right, then we'll move to the next speaker and we'll come to the Q&A after that. So I'm very delighted to have with us our next speaker, who is Anton Basenko. Anton is INPUD's new Executive Director, International Network of People Who Use Drugs. He's known globally course, for his activism, calling for the rights of people who use drugs, people on opioid agonist treatment, people living with HIV, and those with lived experience of hepatitis C. And Anton, I believe that you will focus on the funding crisis for HIV and harm reduction from the US, but also from other donors, and how this has impacted or been present in the CND discussions. So Anton, you have the floor. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for inviting me. And it's really also some additional inspiration to speak after Her Excellency, Laura. And it was my honor to meet you personally. It's a good question. What's next? Actually, what's next? I just want to start from from there. And what's next? And it's good for me. That I'm Ukrainian originally, and of course, it's a special joy for me and a pleasure to know that Ukraine is first ever stepping in as a CND member, also in this special geopolitical situation and war which is still happening in my country, and also to be there like replacing Russia, which many years was really like a blocker of all the progressive initiatives pushed by the civil society community in progressive countries. Yeah, it's a special pleasure, but there is really a lot of work to do to work with our representatives. And with this new or updated coalition and partnership, which also Laura just mentioned, in these new conditions. Additional inspiration for me was also to, sometimes even on the very interpersonal level, some coincidence happens, and it was interesting to meet my schoolmate as the first secretary of Ukrainian mission in Vienna, who is now as a newly appointed person in the Ukrainian mission, responsible for CND, and I'm as the newly appointed executive director of INPUD. This was my first event as a executive director. So this was like a sign for me that this should be very notable and very interesting event. Especially, of course, we were so excited as a community after that first big win we had on the last CND. The mentioning of harm reduction in the wording, but unfortunately, that situation with the new U.S. administration and these funding cuts, and then this geopolitical messages and these funding cuts, which started to happen from the U.S. as the largest donor in the global health architecture, largest donor for organizations like Global Fund, also organizations like Robert Carr Foundation, which is very critical for community and civil society, global and regional networks. And I think that we were really it was a very worrying moment. And of course, as a network of people who use drugs, we could not miss the opportunity to really understand what is happening and to raise certain arguments and certain data on the level of CND, and to understand this kind of a human cost of this policy shift. We launched the survey, and it's I want to thank to all our regional networks of people who use drugs, country networks, and all organizations who helped us to share this survey. In the very limited time before CND, we received first 76 responses, which actually gave us the picture, and we could see the impact in the three angles. The first is like the impact on the organizations, because mostly our respondents, more than 60%, are community-led organizations of people who use drugs. Also, other respondents was local civil society organizations, even some global networks and INGOs, international NGOs, but majority is a community-led organizations of people who use drugs, and you can see the impact on the organizations. For instance, for which more than half for 25% of the respondents, that funding, US funding, was between 76% and 100% of their budget. So in fact, taking this money from the organization is a immediate collapse of organization. Other meaningful part, more than half of organizations reported that it's between quarter and 100%. So it's a severe reduction, and you know that, of course, even taking 20% from the funding in some organization can have a really huge impact. And we could see that impact. We could see how organizations terminated the staff, reduced the working hours, reduced the services or interrupted certain services. And second angle was actually to see what is the impact on the services for people who use drugs. Unfortunately, top five, among top five and the number one, we could see that it's a peer work and outreach work in harm reduction services. Together with HIV testing, HIV treatment and care, services for women who use drugs, and human rights and legal support. Also, if you go to top 10, you will see the opioid agonist therapy and other services. But the key message here is that the peer and outreach work, which is a founding element for the entire harm reduction model, means that we are in the moment that if things keeps going like that, we will lose all that successes and all that actually investments done in the direction of all this advocacy, and actually to reach that success on the last CND, when harm reduction first ever appeared in the language of CND documents, and on the next meeting to be in the situation when you realize that kind of you can lose everything, you can lose the harm reduction as such. It's not already a matter of wording, it's a matter of really losing the life-saving services and treatment and progressive drug policy element for the work with people who use drugs and for the drug policy of the country. That is why I think that what's happened with this voting and what's this success, what's happened with the resolutions, it's also a good step which gives us hopes, but also opens of course the opportunity for further work. I would like to use this opportunity also to mention that, of course, at the moment of CND, as I said, we use only first responses, 67 responses, but till the end of the survey, we received 101 responses. So it's additionally 25 responses, which is not changing the picture, which you could see in the two-pager report, which was presented and circulated via different information sources, and it would be posted here in chat. But I do hope that this brought not only advocacy messages to us as a community network, but also added certain arguments to the political debates or diplomatic debates which happened on the stage of CND. And I could feel that the interest, and we were really timely with this data, and thanks for helping to amplify our voice to IDPC and OHCHR and all the partners, because every event where INPUD and where I was speaking, or some of my colleagues were speaking, the interest and this data was sounded, and I hope that at the end of the day it brought some added value. But as I mentioned, also we are now working on the finalization of the full report, and in the harm reduction conference in Colombia, it is expected to present the full report with all findings. Maybe just to summarize my point. So third angle of that survey also, it's of course impact on the community of people who use drugs. And unfortunately, you can see that It's increased the stigma and discrimination. It's increased the overdosage. It's interruption of services like access to opioid agonist therapy. And it was very also like sad, but also symbolic that, 10 years ago in 2014, when we were or UN agencies, or we were reporting 100 deaths of opioid agonist therapy patients in Crimea because of the annexation of Crimea by Russian Federation. And 10 years after, WHO reporting 50 deaths of opioid agonist therapy patients in Uganda. And this all happening in line with the CND and all these, debates and this let's call softly surprising a speech of representative of US. Unfortunately, another takeaway, which maybe my personal takeaway, because I was sitting next to guys representative of some US NGO doctors, prescribers of opioids. I see that, I understand that the country is in the overdose crisis, but they are pushing for tramadol to be moved to a more strict part of the list. And unfortunately, we had the same situation in Ukraine many years ago. And unfortunately, this movement to the stricter list actually brought us to very opposite results. Instead of resolving the issue, in fact, all tramadol users went to the harder opioids. And in fact, Ukraine received the wave of harder opioid users. And I tried to explain these guys, like informally, using this, kind of informal advocacy. But yeah, it was sad. It was really sad to observe this. But yeah, I think.
Anton, I'm sorry, could you wrap up in 1 minute?
Sorry, yeah, I can, of course. So there is really a lot of work to do, and I'm glad that we keep following the principle, nothing about us without us, and our third voices were heard. Unfortunately, it was only 2 representatives of other regional networks, and 1 person was in fact as a part of rather country funded delegation from Norway. Yeah, that's also the reality of the funding crisis. Yeah, but anyway, as I said, it gives us hope and it opens some new opportunities. And I think that working together with coalition and the new allies and partners, I think we can break the wall. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anton, and thank you for ending on a more hopeful note. Yes, and I hope you can stay on and for the Q&A also. So I'll move on to our 4th panelist for the day, and I'm very delighted that we have with us today Zaved Mahmood. Zaved is with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and he's currently the Human Rights and Drug Policy Advisor there. And Zaved, yeah, we'd also love to hear your reflections of the last CND, and also how what is happening in Vienna is also impacting the rest of the UN system and vice versa. So just as a reminder, you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne, for inviting OHCHR to attend this meeting and giving me space to speak on our experience at the CND. First of all, I would like to echo with Ambassador Laura Hill her views that all activities which has been done, it was very much in cooperation with civil society, member state, and other stakeholder to move forward the defined agenda. And in this context, civil society's role, in particular, the community, people who use drugs, community, their participation and their engagement is so important, as Anton also mentioned, that I would like to echo on that. With that note, I would like to divide my brief presentation in 3 ways. The first, the engagement. Again, coming back to the engagement, that area, that from OHCHR or UN human rights perspective, it has been very important session which is followed by last year High Commissioner participation at the human rights at the CND, as well as in 2023 our report on human rights challenges with regard to drug problem. And this actually, the last 2 years, our contribution set the agenda for us to move forward on the human rights issues. This year, in 2025 CND, there is a lot of discussion was going on at the plenary under different agenda. We were pleased to see that increased number of countries referred to their human rights commitment. Increased number of countries also a specific issue they have highlighted and discussed, which is related to human rights, whether it is under general debate or under Agenda 5 or Agenda 6, Agenda 5 on the international framework and Agenda 6 on the commitment, August and other August 2016 and other commitment. Under all these areas, we have seen that member states, several member states, increased number of member states talking about human rights issues, talking about their commitment to put human rights at the center of the discussion of a drug policy discussion. That was really encouraging for us to see this issue. Then another aspect of the engagement also, we have seen increased number of member state and civil society. They organize human rights related side event, which is put human rights at the center. Just OHCHR cooperated with 20 civil societies organization and member states who organize the side event, that more than 20 event. We have seen that human rights at the center of those discussions. In addition to many other side events also, we followed and we see that human rights in the center. During the discussion, next issue I would like to mention from the human rights perspective, few thematic issue got really prominence in the discussion. First one, obviously, it is harm reduction, which we discussed a few minutes back as well, followed by the last year resolution. This year, 3 or 4 human rights harm reduction related event organized by the member state and civil society. I see here the Switzerland is also present. The first event on human rights, harm reduction and human rights was organized by Switzerland, and OHCHR and others were cooperated with that, and we ensured the participation of the Special Rapporteur on Right to Health, who just published last year 2 reports on harm reduction. So definitely harm reduction, discussion on harm reduction got a momentum. And during the discussion, as also we saw that the engagement with the UNODC on harm reduction was encouraged and was useful discussion also. So that is also important to note that just other UN agency collaborated on this particular area. That the second issue which we noticed and also we supported to move forward, that is in right of the people of indigenous people. Right of the indigenous people, particularly focusing on the coca leaf, what discussion is going on in Geneva, that expert review on the coca leaf on that. There is a 3 specific event on coca leaf, and also we have seen at the plenary session, the member state and civil society bringing this issue prominent way, that it was useful to have that discussion, political support from the member state and also other partners to bring this issue at the forefront. Then another aspect I would like to, another thematic areas, which is really important, that is the incarceration issue, particularly with regard to women. And this incarceration, the discussion, again, it was not only happened in the side event, but also we followed the discussion at the plenary. We saw that member state also addressing this issue. 2 other issues I would like to highlight, that is racial justice and equality. Few member states brought up this discussion at the plenary and also different side event, and this issue not being that much discussed at the CND, but we are inspired that just our office report and also report from the independent mechanism on racism and law enforcement, it is an independent mechanism within the UN system. Their report and many other UN systems report, UN human rights mechanisms report address this issue. But this discussion was not that strong at the CND. But this year we saw that some member state and civil society organization brought this discussion at the front, that one. So it was really inspiring that we need to move forward on that discussion there. Last point I would like to mention that the engagement with the UN human rights mechanism. I see that our colleague from subcommittee on prevention of torture is here, Elena. She was in the CND, attended CND for 2 days, and also spoke at the plenary. So also special, I mentioned about the special rapporteur right to health. Other special rapporteur also joined virtually. So I think that this engagement is really useful to bring the human rights at the center of the discussion of the CND. So how we can continue this engagement. Obviously, we would like to see physical in-person presence of different mechanism or different expert at the Human Rights Council, at the CND, but it's not always possible because due to the funding crisis. I would like to end with one lesson learned, just with regard to people who use drugs and civil society who are working on the on drug-related issues. It is not only funding that creating the crisis for them, but also we can see that more repressive legislation is coming in different parts of the world, which to control the civil society, even as a foreign state, foreign agent, or different other terminology used to targeting them. That has to be really taken into account, and how we can support civil society, people who use drugs, and other actors, even not only civil society organization. We can see that academia has been targeted nowadays, and other entities in the society has been targeted if it is not in line with the specific policy or something. So that has to be also taken into account, that when we are discussing about what next, we need to strategize the how to protect these spaces and what UN can do as well. We are discussing that among ourselves, but your advice, your suggestion and engagement would be really important, along with member state with their support. That one. I would like to stop here. Thank you very much. Just one point I wanted to mention. I forgot to highlight that number of member states address the issue of international implementation of the international guidelines on human rights and drug policy, which is the key human rights framework for us now to working in the drug policy area. We are pleased to organize that event, be a side event, including Ambassador Laura Hill. She spoke, and other colleagues I see here. Juliana also present in this meeting. Sophia from IDPC also present in this meeting. So all your support was very useful to promoting the international guidelines on human rights and drug policy, and we'd like to continue that work with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zaved. Thank you for sharing all of that information and making those connections, and also for your work as well. OHCHR's strong engagement in Vienna has really transformed the Vienna debate, I would say, over the last almost decade now, since you have been strongly engaging there, and many other colleagues from the UN human rights system. So really, thank you. So finally, our last speaker before we move to Q&A will be Charity Monarang. Charity is the Executive Director of the Students for Sensible Drug Policy International. She is South African and based in South Africa and works also at the national level there on policy reform and harm reduction. So Charity, I'll give you the floor. Please note that you have 10 minutes, and I believe that you will reflect on the important role played by South Africa at this last CND and how this demonstrates some shifts in the national policy discussion as well.
Thank you so much, and apologies that I might not be able to flight my face because I'm in another session right now. We're currently busy with our review of our National Drug Master Plan, which kind of speaks to exactly what I need to speak about now around the shift in South Africa's position, or reflecting South Africa's shift in our national policy. So CND was quite interesting. I think the last two CNDs were probably two of the most exciting ones, where we saw a break in consensus. Vienna's just hasn't been the same. It was also quite depressing, honestly, in the first few days, where we actually saw, and we literally saw the geopolitics play out. But I think it was really nice to kind of see more progressive countries taking a stand and really pushing against right-wing movements and less and anti-rights language and perspective. So I think it was really nice to see that at the CND. It was also quite shocking and amazing, really, to kind of see a lot of people actually attending amidst the funding crisis. It was also quite sad to hear about the impacts that the funding crisis has had on civil society organizations and even countries as well. So South Africa has played quite an amazing role. It makes me very proud to be South African when I attend the CND. I mean, for the last few years that I've also been working quite closely with our delegation around advising on the language that needs to be used, really providing key technical support to our delegations. But I think it is a reflection of the shifts that the country is seeing in terms of recognizing harm reduction as something that works and saves lives. We're starting to see a scale up of services, or discussions around scaling up of services, departments kind of taking ownership of harm reduction services. So, for example, the National Department of Health will now be piloting a OAT program in specific districts. It is a pilot, it is still small, but it is good to see that there is a national department actually taking ownership of this. Government departments and individuals are also quite open with talking about supporting harm reduction. We're still trying to get them to recognize decrim as an avenue to explore. But yeah, it's an infant stages of discussion, but we are still seeing new key stakeholders in the space, like traditional leaders being open to having discussions around alternatives to incarceration. So it's really nice to kind of see how, as advocates, we now have new stakeholders that we can engage with that are hungry for information, but we're also able to kind of influence their positions. It's also, it's been great in preparation for CND. For example, the last 2 years, we've been able to convene civil society, to have meetings with our South African delegations, to prepare for the Commission on Narcotic Drugs. So really seeing how our country has been open to receiving inputs from civil society and seeing how those inputs are actually being reflected at international stages. So it's been really fulfilling having South Africa lead on specific issues and key issues. And even though we're not necessarily the favorite to some African countries, we still have some resistance from our fellow African countries. But it's great to see a country like South Africa, who's a leader in the continent, leading on such progressive work. And we're seeing this play out in other avenues as well, not only at the CND, but human rights councils, South Africa is quite We're trying to get South Africa to lead on discussions on drug policy and human rights. With the G20, the back and forth with international politics. So it's really nice to see South Africa really leading and taking the lead on such key issues. Yeah, that's all from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Charity, and thank you for stepping out of your meeting to join us. So yeah, and thank you for sharing the updates from South Africa. And we're certainly seeing that happening at the global level, and it's exciting. So now I'm going to open the floor for the Q&A, and Ambassador Akhil, I'm not sure if you're still there or have at least just a few minutes remaining with us, because there are some really, I think, interesting questions for you. So I'm coming to you first. And I think several questions really relate to the panel. Basically, you know, are you able to share what an ideal panel looks like for you in terms of the panelists, and what can civil society do to support that? And it's, you know, relatedly, like, yeah, how can civil society mobilize to get the right people on the panel? What avenues do you feel that we have as civil society to support you in this? That's the first question.
Okay, for me, the ideal panel is the independent panel. And I think it is a failure of our multilateral system that we spend so much time discussing how the
Laura has frozen for me. I'm sorry. Is it the same for everyone else?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Maybe could go to another question. And
yeah. So maybe for you, Gloria, while we're waiting for Ambassador Hill to come back, it was just this point that, oh, no, the ambassador is back. Give us 1 second. Hello, sorry, we lost you for a second. Ambassador, please continue. Oh, you need to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry, my computer just died, so I had to pick the phone. Sorry. I'll say that my ideal panel is the independent panel, and I think it is a failure of, an explicit failure. The states made explicit our failure to believe in independence, because we spent so much time discussing who was to nominate the experts. And I kept saying, but who cares if in the end, if they're going to be independent, really independent? But I think what we have behind is the belief that if a conservative or a liberal country nominates, they will nominate someone who will respond to them. And I believe in scholarship, and I believe on scientific-based evidence. So I want a panel of independent people who believe in scholarship and scientific-based evidence.
Yeah, thank you. Another really great question, or a series of questions, also came up, Laura. I think it was interesting for colleagues to hear that you held 47 bilateral meetings. And I think civil society colleagues are interested to know what messages resonated with these member states, if it's possible for you to share. For example, what were the key messages provided to Arab states that convinced them to abstain? And maybe that would help us as civil society craft our messages to these countries as we seek to engage them. Is there anything you can share on that front?
Yeah. Well, the first one, and I think that the one that resonated the most, is don't believe there's no consensus in Vienna. There is one single consensus. We all believe the global drug regime is failing. We believe it's failing for different reasons, but we all believe it's failing. So you cannot close yourself to discussion about the failure. That's what was one that was difficult even for the most conservatives to deny. So they had to engage with us in, you cannot keep on saying this is failing and at the same time refuse to talk to us about this failure. So I guess that was one of the most, I think it was our main hook to get everyone talking. We kept on quoting the Russian delegate who said the global drug regime was a Titanic. So we used that sentence pretty much in every single meeting, saying, it's not in good faith to claim that something is sinking and then to deny us the possibility to discuss how to fix it. With the Arab states, I told you I use every single diplomatic tool in my kit. I just, with the Arab states, it's like we do not operate in bubbles. We are not isolated. CND, CCPJ, I mean, we are operating bubbles. They want you. Some countries would like you to think up that you operate in bubbles, but we don't. There were some players that had a lot at stake. And one of them, because the head of UNODC is from the region. So, but in overall, I would say that the Arab states were either open or indifferent. I was amazed to see some of the countries so indifferent.
Yeah, thank you. Do you have time for one last question before you go?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think it's an interesting one because it's one that we've struggled with for so long, where we talk about how to align across the UN system, right? And that has been also focused at the UN bodies and entities. But we also see that sometimes different missions from the same member state are not speaking the same language when they're based in Vienna, Geneva, or New York. How do you see that, and how can we work better to align messages coming from the member states themselves when they are in different UN capitals?
Okay, so that's why Colombia has an ambassador ad hoc for global drug policy, because we needed to align the messages. And there, I have to say that it's not only that the political messages and the political instructions ambassadors get are read differently by individuals and delegations, but also because the personal tastes and likes and dislikes of ambassadors and delegates also matter. So we need to keep everyone honest to whatever the capital is saying. And I think for us, the question of is demanding international coordination at the UN has become such a huge line for us, such a huge line of action that we couldn't we could not commit the same sins of not coordinating among ourselves. So what I think that needs to be done is to track these delegations, see what they see, see what they say, and as international civil society engage with those delegations and see, look, in this other place, your country is saying this other thing. That helps. Many times we don't have enough human resources to do this, and sometimes you have more information than we do about what our delegations are saying somewhere else. So I think you can help us if you let us know when our messages are not in sync. You have it easy with Colombia because Colombia is absolutely committed to work with civil society. So that we will take all messages constructively. It is harder with other countries that are more suspicious of civil society, but you have to do it.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. And I think it's true that, a big part of our job as civil society has been to provide that connectivity between the different UN capitals and to encourage member states to stay in the same line that they take in different places. But
I just want to say that our experience with what we call the Rum Club. The Rum Club is a small group of countries that started meeting at the Colombian residence weekly at the very beginning of my, as soon as I arrived. And that's when we started sort of building confidence among each other and trying to see what our common ground was and what our red lines were. So that's about 12, 13 countries that met regularly at the residence. We became, we got to know each other, and at camaraderie was developed that helped us a lot navigate very tough moments. And it was the nucleus, the core of what became the coalition of the 62. Why am I bringing this up now? Because my delegation in Geneva learned about how we build this through civil society more than through us. And it was because you explained to them what the Rum Club was. Some of you in this call, explained to my delegation in Geneva how the Rum Club worked, that we started talking to them to see if they could replicate the model in Geneva. And they have revived, they have brought to life something that was almost dead, that it was a core group for drugs that was left forgotten or almost forgotten, and now it's back to life.
yeah,
It was partly thanks to you. So that's why it's so valuable what you do.
thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you again for being with us. We really appreciate it. And it's always wonderful to hear you speak and know more about your strategic thinking. And we really appreciate that. Yeah.
I will see many of you in Bogota next week.
You will indeed. We're excited for that.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Okay, so a few more questions for other panelists. I think, Gloria, I would like to come to you on this one, if that's okay. Obviously, we've heard a lot about the US's kind of aggressive stance this year. Probably can expect more of the same, although worryingly with probably better coordination next year. But what do you think about what we might expect from Asian countries, or say China, for example, going forward?
Yeah, I mean, on China, I mean, I guess we can see how they responded on like day one, like in response to the opening statement from the US, where they accused China and Mexico and Canada for the flow of fentanyl coming into the US. And China responded quite swiftly. They asked for a right of reply straight away. And in their response, they pointed out what the US should be doing instead of putting the blame on others. And how China has been responding on the tariffs issue so far. Like, I mean, and you see also in other international fora where in the past the US has accused China of human rights violations, for example. China, you can see how China responds also with a tit for tat kind of response. Then they will go, there was one occasion where then they referred to human rights violations in the US to basically diminish the claims of the US. So, I mean, it'd be interesting to see, like, I think going in the context of CND, how this will go. Like, and I can't imagine China kind of backing down. You can only kind of imagine them doubling down. And then, as they have with the tariffs issue, try to get other countries to side with them. Whether they will go further into the opioids issue, or also look elsewhere on how they can bring issues against that will impact the US. I was wondering but this is pure speculation, so I don't know how others think about the cannabis issue, where, of course, cannabis is legally regulated in several jurisdictions in the United States, which in ways that are against the conventions, but it hasn't really, the cannabis issue hasn't really been discussed openly at CND, and I wondered if that might change in the context, in this more kind of divisive context.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Gloria. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, it hasn't been discussed openly at CD for a while, but it was previously, of course, when Canada was, especially when Canada was moving to legally regulate, and they came under a lot of pressure openly at the CND. But the US position, yeah, the US has always managed to hide behind this argument of the federal system that they have. So I'll turn now to another question that has been posed from speakers for Zaved. Zaved, you mentioned the importance of the involvement of Indigenous people, and they have been excluded, largely excluded from the UN drug policy debate so far. So what can we do to ensure that they will be represented as part of the review panel?
Thank you to you, and also to Martin. Martin raised this question. I just saw that. Thanks, Martin. This is a good question. Actually, first, I would like to mention that we do see the more recognition of the right of the indigenous people in the UN document, different document. Most recently, General Assembly resolution addressed this issue. And in addition to human rights mechanism and their report regularly addressing this issue, including our report 2023 report, addressed this issue of the right of the indigenous people as a vulnerable group. We need to protect the right of the indigenous people in the context of the world drug problem or world drug situation in this context. So it is now within the system, it is recognized that this is one of the specific group we need to take into account. So I think that civil society organization, they could put forward to the member state in Vienna, and also, for example, Ambassador Laura Hill mentioned about the engaging with the chair of the commission, engaging with the UNADC, who are now in the driving seat to setting up this panel. So put forward a strong argument on the basis of recognized UN position with regard to right of the indigenous people in the context of drug policy. I think that would be my advice, that civil society could take lead on that and to push forward. And also not only if we look at the different stakeholder or different entity who's supposed to nominate different members, panelists, including Secretary General. He has to nominate 5 representatives. So I think that whoever engage into this exercise, a strong argument to put forward to them on the basis of the recent UN document and UN report and other deliberation from the UN side vis-a-vis the right of the indigenous people in the context of drug policy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Zaved. That's very helpful. I think we have time for maybe one last question, but Charity, I don't know if you're still with us. No, okay. I don't think she's there. But maybe Anton, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to pick up. I'll give you the chance to have one last final remark if you would like to.
Well, I have 2 remarks. Actually, first is the work with these new countries, because it's not only Ukraine who stepped in, it's also a group of other countries. And as we can see, sometimes the relatively smaller countries can do a lot if they really in the proper alliance and organize the advocacy and the work with the strong arguments. And also this is where we as communities, because you see we are on one hand dependent on elementary finances to have an opportunity to travel and to raise our voices physically on the events like CND. But we also understand that there is a whole bunch of work between CND. CND is like a final accord, right? And it's of course important to be there, but also it's the entire year to work with. And of course, the funding for the funding streams for communities and civil society to support this work is very necessary. It's a message to all potential donors who just share our values and really wants to have a global drug policy changed and to really bring the progressive practices and values to this table. We are just staying open, and we also we will keep bringing the. We are not just troublemakers. We really want to be partners in this, like Laura said, scientific aspects. We were ready to bring the data from our community-led monitoring, because sometimes, additionally to purely scientific data, the side of the community and this monitoring by the community and bringing the additional data and facts by the eyes of community. This is critical to really have the full picture in these debates, and we are of course ready to stay as a strong partner here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anton. Yeah, very, very important point regarding that. Yeah, we need those perspectives, not just so-called scientific data and evidence. And actually, that will be important to inform the discussions of the panel after they've been selected. So IDPC is in the process of producing an advocacy note on the review, on the independent panel, the background to it, our ambition for it, what the role of the Secretariat, which will be UNODC, will be, for example, in the panel, what the panel should focus on within their remit. I think there was a question about how far the panel could go. Compromises that have been made diplomatically along the way include that the panel will stay within the framework of the 3 UN drug control conventions. However, of course, in looking at the functioning of the system with the conventions underpinning that, I think there will be space for raising some questions about how the conventions drive certain punitive approaches, which are simply ineffective and incredibly damaging. In any case, I would like to take the opportunity to thank our wonderful panelists. Thank you to Ambassador Hill. Thank you to Gloria, to Anton, to Zaved, and to Charity for being with us. This event has been recorded, so we will share the recording later online for colleagues who could not make it. And thank you to all of the participants for joining today and being part of this conversation. So thank you very much, and speak to some of you and see you soon.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Au revoir, adios. Bye.
Bye. Well done, Gloria.
We stop the recording, Anne? How do I stop recording, right?
I think it's, yeah, stop it. Yeah. Did you?